South Africa is among the countries with the highest prevalence of drug-resistant TB in the world. And shockingly, though, only 50% of these patients are on treatment. Stellenbosch University is now trying to shorten the diagnosis process, and it hopes that this will indeed lead to people and more people being on treatment and a whole lot sooner too. Joining us this morning is Brigitta Derendinger, Dr. Brigitta Derendinger, to be accurate, and she's from the university's Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. A very good morning to you, Doc. Good to have you with us this morning. I was quite interested in the distinction between TB and drug-resistant TB. What is the difference?
So sure. So normal stock standard TB can be treated by our normal drugs such as rifampicin and isoniazid, but unfortunately TB becomes resistant to some of these drugs. So drug-resistant TB just means that the TB bacterium is resistant to certain drugs.
Are we talking about the same strain of bacterium, or is it a different strain of bacterium for drug resistance?
It's usually a different strain, so it has different mutations that cause these resistance to specific drugs.
And at what point do you find out whether your TB is drug resistant or not?
Well, we would need to go on. So the first, normally in South Africa, a second specimen is required, a sputum specimen is required to confirm this drug-resistant TB. And then to further test other TB drugs that the person may be resistant to. But unfortunately, people often do not provide a second sputum due to some people simply not being able to produce a second sputum, or people simply not returning to the clinics due to work constraints, transport, etc. So in the study, if we could negate the need for a second sputum, a drug-resistant TB diagnosis can be made quicker, and the person can be put on to treatment in a shorter time frame. So we're talking a few weeks to a couple of days.
Help me make sense of this, doctor. If this is called drug-resistant tuberculosis, what type of treatment is actually available for a TB of that nature?
So there's a couple of new drugs that have come up into the pipeline. So we have a brand new drug called bedaquiline. So this is the first drug in about 40 years that had a new mechanism of action that is fighting tuberculosis, specifically drug-resistant tuberculosis. And we've moved away from the injectable regimen for drug-resistant TB, and bedaquiline has now been added to that regimen. We also have other new drugs such as linezolid and delamanid. So these drugs are definitely helping us to curb the transmission and treat drug-resistant TB.
Now, in 2021, there was an estimate of about 450,000 cases of TB and drug-resistant TB globally. How dangerous is it? What is the mortality rate?
So I don't have the numbers on me right at the moment. So the mortality rate for drug-resistant TB is quite high. So we looked specifically at a study in bedaquiline patients. So these were non-clinical TB patients. So we know that these patients experience drug delays and drug shortages. They receive less support and are monitored even less than patients in clinical trials. We saw that in this study that about 50% of patients were bedaquiline resistant. But just to note that this was a very specific cohort. So this means that these patients, we were expecting to see high resistance to bedaquiline. But this is where we know that this resistance can start, so we can start to understand this resistance in this small cohort so that we can therefore curb this resistance and the later transmission in these kinds of settings.
We speak of treatment. Can it actually be cured?
Yes, definitely. So we want to shorten, the ultimate goal is to shorten to diagnose any kind of TB and shorten the treatment so that patients will finish their courses of antibiotics. Because what often happens is that patients stop treatment when they are feeling better. And yeah, so ultimately we would like to shorten treatment, and then we would be able to curb transmission and ultimately cure TB.
You spoke about beta-choline. What are the costs of treatment using this drug?
I'm not 100% sure how much bedaquiline costs now in South Africa, unfortunately. Sorry, off the top of my head.
Affordability-wise?
I think it is becoming more affordable. So basically, South Africa was one of the first countries to roll out bedaquiline in our, and now, as I mentioned before, it is part of our injectable-free regimen. So now the patients don't need to go to the clinics every day for a very painful injection. They can now receive this new drug called bedaquiline. So the more uptake of bedaquiline, the cheaper it gets.
Well, thank you so much for that update. Certainly good news for those who have TB. Thank you so much, Doctor.